Hello, I'm Daniel Szabo, and this is the Thursday reading. Peter Morris, Chapter 6. He put on his socks and his black boots. He always painted barefooted, so that even his feet were sometimes stained by the paint. But he did not often show his feet, so it did not really matter. His desire to go to work had not waned. He climbed the road to the bus stop with what appeared to be sad steps, but his face was not wan, and his spirits were higher than usual. He sat in the bus in front of an old black man. In his mind, he pronounced a quick pentameter, and I saw an old black man with wrinkles. The vision was a vision of wisdom and peace. The man was wearing a blue jalaba and a little white hat. He was probably a Muslim. He looked happy and melancholy at the same time. His eyes were dark and shone with life. Peter wanted to talk to him, but he did not know what to say. He had often wanted to talk to someone he did not know, offer flowers to a middle-aged woman in the park, or tell people in the bus he liked their hat or their hairdo, but he never dared. "I would love to have a grandfather like you," he suddenly said to the old man, looking in his eyes. Peter talked with a soft voice, not the one he had used the first time he had met Zoldy. He had always dreamt of having a grandfather. He could only imagine what it would be like, as they had both died before he was born. But the old man gave the same reaction as the girl had. No words. He smiled and shook his head gently. He pointed at his mouth and shook his head again. He did not speak Peter's language. He then closed his eyes and looked as if he had fallen asleep. Peter was free to look at him more intensely. His forehead was like the dunes in the desert, but instead of the sand it was black gold. He tried to imagine the man's life. He would have liked to hear his story. As his eyes started moving down the man's nose, he felt the bus taking a sharp turn. He looked outside and realized he had missed his stop. He stood up and got off at the next traffic light. He did not have long to walk, and he was early, as always. Joe greeted him with an intriguing smile. His colleagues had not arrived yet. She confessed she had been slightly worried when he had not showed up for work, but she was happy to have him back. The expression made him smile inwardly, as she had never had him and probably never would. He noticed that she had no striking feature. She was neither fat nor slim, neither tall nor short. She was not beautiful, but not ugly either. Her eyes were brown and she dressed without taste. Objectively, there was nothing in her that could attract the eye, but her recent kindness towards him had aroused his interest. He wanted to ask her why she had been worried, but his conversation with Zoldy had not transformed him entirely yet. He was still going to be discreet and unassuming. She asked him if everything was all right. He said yes, avoided her stare, and started displaying the cans of baked beans on the shelves. He had been working in silence for about half an hour when he overheard one of the girls saying, "I think Brad Pitt is a really good actor." His thoughts had been running up, back and forth like the tide, always falling back on Zoldy. By now her face was so eroded he could hardly remember it. Their conversation had thinned down to a few words. She had said he was funny and not afraid of paradoxes. Maybe she had not said much more, except when she had introduced herself in such a vivid way. For once he had talked more than he had listened. Was he over-interpreting their encounter? Maybe he did not mean that much. He did not know her. Would she say that Brad Pitt was a really good actor? He wanted to talk more and hear her talk more. He wanted her to know who he was. He would go to the zoo tomorrow, and hopefully she would be there. The following morning, when he started to the zoo, the sky was so low that it felt like he was going to walk into it. The clouds were dark grey, almost black. There was no doubt it was going to rain, but he did not want to take a chance and miss her. It started raining only once he had arrived at the zoo. The willow trees near the tiger's cage were large enough to shelter him from the rain. They wept in perpetual lamentation. She was not there. As he stood, watching the tiger, he remembered the morning when she was standing in front of the cage, silently, not answering his questions. There was something magical, mystical even, in the series of events that had occurred since. It did not seem like his life anymore. It had happened less than a fortnight ago, and yet he could feel he had already changed. As the heavy drops that were now falling on his pelt roused the tiger from his sleep, he walked slowly and majestically towards Peter Morris, or rather, towards the tree under which Peter had found refuge. The tiger was only a few meters away from him. He had never seen the animal so close. He felt awe in the presence of this professional killer. There was no cage in the drills of his eyes. His stride was wilderness of freedom. Peter saw the loneliness in those same eyes. But the tiger did not need his pity. He could destroy anyone in a purr. Was this freedom? Now he had another good question for Zoldy's father. What did the words, "and the truth shall set you free," mean? Tomorrow was Sunday. He hoped some of his questions would be answered. He walked home with the rain. He had never liked umbrellas. The rain was not dangerous. Why did people need protection? Maybe it was also a question of freedom. This rain was warm and full of a secret joy, like the tears of a loved woman on one's hand. He had often thought that only sensitive people could enjoy being soaked by the rain. Like the soil, men needed to be refreshed by the water of the sky. As a child, he had noticed that it was mainly old, bald men and grumpy women who carried umbrellas. He had thought they would have needed the rain to grow back their hair and their smile. He jumped in a few puddles. He was light. Often in his dreams, he jumped and stayed in the air for as long as he wanted. When he woke up from those dreams, he always felt light and started the day with a smile that most people never saw. As he reached his house, he noticed something bulging out of his seldom used red letterbox. It was a package. Surely a mistake. The parcel was beautifully wrapped in ordinary brown craft paper. The black letters clearly called out his name, Peter Morris. On the back, a few words written in tiny letters. His name was Accordion. He didn't have an umbrella, so she followed him. And that's it for this week. See you next week for Chapter 7.